Gosh, I feel like I'm just giving David Fincher a blowjob in this interview, but God, I'm like obsessed with him. The thing that attracted me, first of all, was David Fincher's name. And in that moment, I fell in love with him and fell in love with his brain. To me, he's always the smartest person in any room. So when I saw David Fincher on the email, I was like, yes. He's basically God. I think he can do everybody's job better than everybody. David Fincher, this is for you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 106 of the It's the Pictures podcast. My name is John Gilpatrick, and joining me, as always, is...
Co-host extraordinaire Max Colville.
Oh, you were so close today, Max.
I know. I try every time, but...
It's okay. You did a couple episodes by yourself, so we're getting back into a rhythm, you know, that we had once upon a time back in episode 105. So I think that going forward, you'll be good. But we also have a guest on this episode, so I know, fair enough, you know, you stumble a little bit in the intro because we couldn't wait to get to introduce our guest this week. Her name is Roxana, Haddadi. Roxana, how are you?
I'm doing well.
I almost got through that myself, but I couldn't.
Okay, all right. I understand.
Yeah.
I understand that we're all very excited to get into Fincher talk. So I think
yes, we are. We are going to talk about David Fincher. For Max and I, it is a long overdue episode. We did a Mank episode and did like Citizen Kane and everything that goes along with that back in November, and then we're going to follow it up with the Fincher episode, but then we got into the holidays and Sundance, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And so we're finally coming back to our very long overdue David Fincher episode. And we're super thrilled to have you with us.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here.
Can you tell us, a little bit about like who you are and where you write and things like that?
Sure. I am a film and TV and just general overall pop culture critic. You can find my stuff at Pajiba, Crooked Marquee, RogerEbert.com, Polygon, AV Club, Vulture, basically anywhere that will tolerate my presence. Right now, I guess my main ongoing thing that I'm doing is I am revisiting Freaks and Geeks for Vulture. So I'm writing 3 recaps a week on that, and somehow we're already, midway through that. So yeah, you can just find my stuff a lot of different places online.
That's a shame. There should be more Freaks and Geeks.
Yes. Well, but at the same time, and I said this in my first recap, I wonder if we love it so much because it ended. It didn't have a chance to disappoint us. So.
like so many other shows did eventually.
Yes.
That's a fair point. So that sounds awesome. I definitely am excited to check that out. It's a big Freaks and Geeks fan myself. We're going to talk about David Fincher, as I mentioned, get into some of his films and sort of what we love about them, maybe what we don't like about some of them. Max, I'm very curious to hear your Benjamin Button thoughts. And we'll do what we've been watching. We've got 3 new releases, whatever that means in this day and age here in 2021, but we'll talk about those. Before we do, Max, like for the longest time, we had a string of bad luck with some, just really tragic passings of great film legends from episode to episode. It seemed like we were doing this on a very regular basis, and this is just like the mother load here in early 2021. We've got a bunch that we need to sadly talk about. I guess Christopher Plummer, I believe, was the most recent. The Sound of Music star passed away at the age of 91. But we also lost in recent weeks Cicely Tyson, Hal Holbrook, Cloris Leachman. What do you say? I mean, all like titans of cinema. I was like personally super sad to see Cicely Tyson because there was like this great interview with her not long before about like, her career and things that I had seen going around Twitter. And I was just like, oh man, that is so cool. And then she passed away like very, very shortly after that.
Yeah. I think it was only like 2 days.
Right. Yeah, right. It was like so quick. Yeah, it was so weird.
Yeah.
She did this like really big like Today Show interview or something like that. It felt like kind of like David Bowie-esque, right? Because like David Bowie like released his album and you think, oh yeah, this is like gonna be a great time for him, and then like he passes away so quickly, no one knew he was ill. But yeah, we've lost some great voices in film and television. Cicely Tyson's autobiography has just come up. That's why she was on the Today Show. and
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people are probably picking that up.
Roxana, any like favorite performances or films from some of the individuals we're just talking about?
Oh my God. I think Plumber meant the most to me. I mean, obviously for a lot of us, it was very much The Sound of Music, which was a movie that he notoriously hated
Yeah, I
for
know,
a
right?
lot of his
Yeah.
career. So, it's always really interesting to think about how we view the art that people create and how they view it themselves. But I know he came around to it in the end. But I really love his latter career as he sort of transitioned into being this very ominous sort of figure of patriarchal authority. Like I
We're
really
going to
love
talk
him
about
in
that in a little bit, right?
yeah, like I really love him in Inside Man and
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
Syriana and even going a little strange in the Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus. So I just really love who he became later on. And honestly, he was hot his entire life, which very impressive. So I will
91,
miss
yeah.
that man. Yeah, he was great.
Yeah, yeah, he was just great in everything he was in, and so it took him until I believe 2009 before he got his first Oscar nomination. We're going to talk in a little bit about sort of the nonsense that is award season right now, but somebody to go so like formally unrecognized by I guess his peers for that long. But he had such a great run over the last like decade or so from Beginners, which he finally won an Oscar. I believe he's the oldest actor who's ever won an Oscar for that movie for Best Supporting Actor.
Yeah, it's in competition
Oh,
because
Mhm.
okay.
because
Oh, I
there's
see.
other Oscars who have been giving to people who are older, but he's the oldest to win in competition.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. I think Hal Holbrook was probably would have contended with him if he was able to take it home for Into the Wild a number of years ago. I remember really liking him in that movie, and of course, he was super well known. I think for All the President's Men, he played Deep Throat in that. Super effective performance, very very memorable, and in a great movie. Cloris Leachman uh, was an Oscar winner herself, I believe, for The Last Picture Show. Is that right?
Yes,
Yeah, yeah, she's really
and,
great in
and,
that movie.
and
I'm
then
not
you
as yeah, go ahead.
and then you got to see her for the first time in Young Frankenstein for that movie that
Oh,
I
I did.
recommended to
Yes,
you.
yes, I did. I did. I watched that for our first loser watches something bet and she was I think is that her most iconic performance, Max?
I think so. I think that's what
Yeah.
people recognize her from.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. But, it's never fun to have these conversations. But it also is like a great reason for you to seek out some performances from some of these individuals who maybe you're not as familiar with. I know I'd love to for Cicely Tyson, who I'm familiar with as just a screen legend, but not necessarily as an actress. And I think, that's a shame. That's on me. And it's something that I look forward to rectifying hopefully soon. So let's move on. Always a hard shift from that conversation. I hope we don't have to have them for a while. But we did want to talk a little bit about, I guess, the status of the quote unquote awards season. And we had a very, very, let's say, dispiriting set of Golden Globe nominations. It
Yeah.
was, yeah, it was always going to be a weird year for awards because movies were very rarely in cinemas. I think created some shifts and some just I guess opened some opportunities for movies to get recognized that might not have otherwise, and they still somehow didn't.
Yeah.
So where do we want to start? I know we have Delroy Lindo on the list. Max and I were like huge fans of Da 5 Bloods. For me, it's still one of my favorite movies of 2020. And his is if it's not my favorite performance, it's really close. Roxana, is there? I mean, do you want to talk about him? Is there anybody else that you'd like to highlight as particularly egregious? Like, take 30 seconds to make a stump case for anybody listening who's like, I have to vote on these things and I don't know what to do.
Well, for me, a couple people that I am shocked didn't show up were Paul Raci from Sound of Metal. I don't understand how you see that performance, and he's so natural and empathetic and compassionate and just and that was very strange to me to see him left out. And I also am a little surprised by how much Brian Dennehy's final performance in Driveways hasn't seemed to get any sort of award traction. And I know it's a very small, very indie movie, but he, like we just talked about with the people we were just discussing, was such a beloved that I just am a little surprised that there hasn't been any sort of conversation about his work in that film. So that's been really shocking to me.
But doesn't it all come back to like they like the awards that are like really showy or have people
Yeah,
who
they want the
yell?
most. Yeah, they want the most, which is why we have so many Trial of the Chicago 7 nominees.
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of interesting. I'm in a critics group and we got sent all this crazy stuff this year from Netflix in particular. And like, you get screeners for all their films. With the Trial of the Chicago 7, I got like a 500-page, like a giant coffee table book.
Yes, I
And
got
like,
that as well.
yeah, Defy Bloods comes in like a cardboard thing that like, that is like half bent and just like, they couldn't like care less about seemingly, which sort of is a shame, but like also is fairly predictable at this point.
Right. But
Max, is it?
how
Oh
does
yeah,
any
please.
of this make way for Jared Leto though? Like I don't understand the Leto nominations at
Well,
all.
we'll be able to hear John's thoughts on the little things later.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Thankfully not nominated there. I mean, you could, yeah, Jared Leto. Max, is there anybody, who you would like to take a minute to stump for?
I don't know. I think Roxana got like two that were very important. I thought that Brian Dennehy was fantastic in Driveways. It is this like really small movie, but he's a really heartwarming performance as the next door neighbor. It reminded me of the Julia Louis-Dreyfus movie Enough Said.
I love that movie.
Yeah, that came out a bunch of years ago. It reminded me a lot about that, and I don't know. I think that there's always misses. I think that the Screen Actors Guild, who also announced their nominations, were a little bit better with what they did. And it's just like crazy to see stuff like music in the Golden Globes like nominated for best comedy
I don't
musical.
even know what that is.
It's like Sia's movie that came out.
I don't know what.
Although I don't even, it hasn't really, so it comes out this week, and this was the movie that was getting a lot of pushback from the autistic community
Oh
because,
yeah.
yeah, this is the one that stars Sia's like dance protege, Maddie Ziegler, playing an autistic teenager. And I have seen the movie, and it is not good. So
Hey.
it's very strange how it sort of snuck its way in there, both as a movie that like all the public reaction has been questionable, and like how did you guys see this movie already?
This is like a Golden Globe special, right? Like
Yeah.
somebody knew that this was up there, right for the taking with the appropriate, deposit in some Swiss bank accounts.
Right, and it's just
Yeah.
it's something you look at and you're like, how does something like On the Rocks or Eurovision, stuff that probably won't get mentioned anywhere else, miss? Where like the like really like fun, kind of cute movies that seem to be right at home in that category.
Also, we already tolerated the prom. Must we also
Oh
have
my god.
must we also have music? It's just too much. It's too much.
It's like they just ran out of movies and they're like, well, this one's called music and the category is musical. There's no movie called comedy. I guess we should just throw it in. There was a comedian a couple of years ago, but there was more movies to choose from. Yeah, I guess we'll be forced to keep an eye on that going forward, unfortunately. But let's shift our attention to David Fincher, one of my very, very favorite filmmakers. Max, can you tell us a little bit about this guy and why we're talking about him, why he's worthy of all of our time?
Yeah, so I believe David Fincher has 11 films that he's directed to his name, but he's certainly been involved with a lot of other films over the last, I want to say like 3 decades now. And famously, he got his big picture start with Aliens 3, which he came in as like almost like coming. Was it like a handyman job, John, or was it he was the original
No,
director?
he
That
was the original director, but they just weren't satisfied with the product, so there was just a lot of push and pull over what the final result was going to be.
Well, from a guy who just really got his start right in the fire of a big, huge motion picture franchise, right following James Cameron and Ridley Scott, Fincher has gone on to carve out a place for himself in cinema. He's done other movies like The Game and Panic Room. Um, Certainly, those are some of the smaller movies that he's done, but then you have iconic movies that have plastered the walls of plenty of college students like Fight Club and Social Network. You have his thrillers like Seven and Zodiac, and then later in his career, I'd say like in the last decade or so, he's still stuck to that like thriller horror stuff with The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and Gone Girl.
Mm-hmm.
But his latest, which we talked about recently, Mank, is definitely a departure from a lot of what he tends to do. Yeah, I guess that might have the most similar with the story like Benjamin Button, which is the one that I just watched. And while not necessarily having anything too creepy as the hook, it was a really solid picture. He's always been a director that has been sought after, and I believe that at least in film circles, everyone is always looking forward to his next film and see what he would do. Do you think, John, that sums up David Fincher well, or you have something to add?
No, I mean, I think that's pretty good. Roxana, what's sort of your relationship with David Fincher and his films like?
Oh man. My relationship with David Fincher is that for I think it was my 16th birthday, my parents were sort of strict growing up, but we always got movies on Fridays. And for my 16th birthday, it was like, okay, for this one time, you can have like a sleepover party and you can have pizza and you can like pick whatever movie you want. And I picked Fight Club, and my two friends hated it and I loved it. And I still love it very, very much. My relationship with Fincher is that I think that he is very cold
Mhm.
and very methodical. And there's something about that that I respect very much because he is able to build these worlds that to me are very bleak, but very recognizably so. And there's something about that that I find very appealing. I think Fincher is one of those people who we still kind of get the hushed like not whispers necessarily, but I remember when Girl with the Dragon Tattoo came out, there was a lot of chatter about his relationship with Rooney Mara, and then I know when Gone Girl came out, there was a lot of like, is this movie taking advantage of Emily Ratajkowski? And so I think that sometimes people assume the worst of Fincher because he is playing in a lot of themes related to like toxic masculinity and social violence. And I think sometimes people don't look at much as his subtext as they should. So I really appreciate Fincher, although I think that, like you guys said, he has that like college dorm room reputation. I still love that. I guess I'm still, 18 years old.
Yeah, I mean, I still love it too, to an extent. I do feel like my tastes with him have shifted a little bit over time, and I really liked what you had to say about sort of diving into the subtext of the films, because I do think that there's just a lot going on there, and he creates these worlds that are like you don't necessarily want to inhabit them, but he sort of forces you to. And when you do, and you sort of like just embrace it, then you're like, oh, this is actually really interesting. And it's not just sort of what it looks like. Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is a film we both, I think, are going to talk about that I think exemplifies that so well, where it's just like, I mean, very, very deliberately cold. It's in Scandinavia and the palette is just frigid and they're constantly shivering. But once you kind of get into it and you see sort of what's happening there, there's more to it than just the surface level stuff. I think.
I mean, I guess I want to add, John, is that commercially, I don't know that a David Fincher film sells as well as, like, say, some of these other auteurs or even big name directors. I mean, like, certainly his films aren't selling as well as Christopher Nolan's or Martin Scorsese or anything like that. I mean, he has a pedigree certainly in film communities, but I don't think for a moment that, say, Gone Girl or Girl with the Dragon Tattoo were sold as being David Fincher films as much as that they were sold as being adaptations of popular novels.
Oh, see, I actually think that they were very much sold as Fincher films.
Yeah.
Because I think of a lot of like the magazine cover stories and like especially Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, like they really hyped up whatever weird relationship he had going on with Rooney. Like in the lead up to that film. I remember there was some interview where the journalist kept referencing that like Rooney Mara would look at Fincher before she spoke, like before she said anything. So I think that there was sort of a weird vibe in terms of people thinking that there was some like codependency there that might not have actually been there. But I do think both of them were sold as Fincher films. And I mean, Gone Girl was phenomenally successful.
I know. That's the thing that I always find super weird about him is that, for a while there, it did seem like he wasn't going to make any more movies. And which is weird because the three, quote unquote, last movies he made, at least before Mank came out, were all like $100 million successes.
It's weird that it feels like Fincher is getting squeezed out, but honestly, he does make those movies that cost between like 40 to 70 million, maybe, which is getting to be on the high side of things for
it's
like
the Netflix thing now.
for like adult oriented entertainment. But like I too, because I remember very much that Fight Club bombed.
Yeah.
Like that I recall. And like Panic Room sort of had like a little bit of a word of mouth, but like most everything else has actually done okay box office wise. I just think his career really seemed to flourish in that time when box office expectations, as they are now, are sort of out of control. So it's like he really is like a filmmaker who has a very specific audience, I think, and studio demands want a different audience.
It also, and I don't know if there's actually any evidence for this, but I'm curious to what you guys think of it. But he, made, I think, his last three films, you could say Social Network is this pairing that they hyped up a lot of Fincher and Sorkin, and what's that going to be like? And then you have The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which is Fincher and this like really, really super popular novel. And then you have Gone Girl, which is Fincher and another super popular novel. You could argue Fincher, Affleck to an extent, but it sort of seems like he's part of the story of the film, but it's always him and that if he runs out of people to be the and with, is there really a market for just the David Fincher thing, which is kind of what we got with Mank.
Yeah, I think that is what you got with me.
I don't know if that's good going forward for if he has ideas, but then again, right. Netflix is just sort of a different thing altogether. But
and it looks like he's going to make his next film for Netflix too. I saw something about deals.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that sounds about right. I've watched a number of these fairly recently. And the through line for me in terms of like the stories that seem to attract him, or at least what he pulls out of different texts, is a main character. Sometimes it's a man and sometimes it's a woman, but they always seem to be sort of running away from themselves in some capacity, which I found kind of interesting. You have, Mark Zuckerberg is running away from like the Harvard nerd to be like the cool kid. And you have, Ben Affleck and Rosamund Pike in Gone Girl, who are just afraid to be their own actual selves and how like screwed up they are, and
like literally physically running away.
yeah, in some cases, yes. You know, Benjamin Button is this sort of anomalous person who is frightened about what he actually is. You had Panic Room. You could say Jodie Foster's character is, trying to build this new life for herself. And I just think that was an interesting theme. And it's sort of an interesting, for a guy who like makes some films in some different genres, at least on the surface, like they feel like they could be different. And there's, I think, a lot unifying them, which sort of helped me, I think, dissect Mank a little bit more. But we talked about that film months ago. We don't need to get into it too much. We're going to talk about some Fincher films that have never been on the podcast before. And I'm going to kick it over to both of you first, because I think you both either have recently watched Zodiac or are just intimately familiar enough with the material that you can talk about it. So Roxana, since you're the guest here, like tell us a little bit about Zodiac and sort of why it appeals to you as a Fincher film or just a film in general, and just what you find special about it.
So I think for me, the through line, I totally buy your reading of that being what draws Fincher. This idea of sort of like running away from the version of yourself that you are and attempting to build something new. But for me, Fincher's films have always seemed like they're about the idea of humanity as a puzzle and like living as a puzzle and sort of how you navigate the very confusing experience of being alive and all of that entails. And so I think for me, given that that's like my reading of what he does, I think that Zodiac rules just because it's so it is like we talked about, it is very bleak, but I think that he really analyzes like what drives us individually and as a collective culture. So Zodiac is set in California during the time of the Zodiac killer's rampage, up and down California, which was very much a time of uncertainty and mass confusion and just this palpable sense of horror as to when this serial killer who was marketing himself with, puzzles and coded messages to newspapers and to the cops, when he would strike again. And I might just leave it there because I think Max, do you wanna jump in
Yeah,
on this?
you literally you led with saying like he likes these puzzles, and here we are in Zodiac. He's showing puzzles to newspaper and police departments. I had meant to revisit the entire movie, but I revisited it probably about the first 40 minutes to an hour today. And what strikes me about this movie, and later I'll talk about Benjamin Button, is like on paper these are long movies, right? Like 2 hours and 40 minutes. If you've ever listened to the podcast, a through line for me is like runtime for these movies. And
Yeah.
I like a movie that isn't too long, but the Fincher's movies kind of sing, right? They don't stay too long in one place. They keep moving. I think, I mean, maybe Mank stays a little too long, but for the most part, they get through what they need to get through and get out. And I really like the pacing of Zodiac. I think like there's this great play going on. Like we mentioned earlier, All the President's Men, when we talk about Hal Holbrook, and certainly I'd put Zodiac right up there with All the President's Men and Spotlight, Oscar winners of like this really investigative journalism type movie. And I really love those. And also Fincher also takes the time to show these like almost short films, right, where the Zodiac killer is doing his heinous deeds, and these are really gruesome segments. I mean, he does not shy away from showcasing just what the Zodiac did, and like you're watching and you're like, oh god, like that is rough stuff. And I love how there's that interplay there. And of course, another thing that I really like about Zodiac is that it was almost like Robert Downey Jr.'s comeback film, right? For a long time, he was away from cinema.
Justice for
And
Kiss Kiss Bang Bang.
Yeah,
yeah.
classic. Christmas
It's okay.
classic.
Yeah. You seen Kiss
He,
Kiss Bang Bang, Mix?
I think I've seen it.
Oh,
Oh,
Mac, you would remember if you've
yeah,
seen it,
yeah.
Mac.
You should watch it if you haven't. You'd really, really like it.
Okay. Regardless, so
Try.
I'm
Yeah,
wrong,
yeah.
but
No, you're fine. You're fine. I think it counts still.
but no, I really think of Zodiac as like the last like Robert Downey Jr. movie where he was really able to flex his muscle until he became Iron Man for the next decade.
Mm.
He hasn't been much more than Iron Man since, and it's great to see him in something like Zodiac.
Justice for the Judge.
No, the judge does not deserve justice.
I'm
That is
Oh
an
my
joking.
awful
god.
movie.
Oh,
I'm joking.
terrible.
I'm joking.
Terrible. Um I also think that one thing, speaking to that idea of like these murders almost being short films, I think what Zodiac does really well is it contrasts like the beauty and somewhat hopefulness of California, like in the late 60s, early 70s. Like, yes, the Manson murders happened, and yes, there's a lot of violence going on, but California is still like a beautiful, comfortable place to live for a lot of people. And something I think Fincher does really well is he contrasts like these very tidy, well-to-do teenagers who were often the Zodiac's victims with like the increasing bureaucratic incompetence of the
Yes.
police who were chasing him, and also just the how much you give yourself over to an obsession, because we're talking about Downey's character here, and you also have Jake Gyllenhaal, who plays the cartoonist who works with Robert Downey Jr. at the newspaper and who begins devoting himself to solving these ciphers. And so I think something that the film is doing really well is it's telling you two parallel stories about obsession, because you have the Zodiac killer who arguably is unable to control what he does. And so in that way can't rein in his own violence. And then you also have characters like the police and like the journalists who also are pushed to the limits of what they can do by this case and by their obsession to solve it. I mean, you see like some shady evidence planting, and you see some shady theorizing, and you see increased alcoholism, and you see a lot of stuff in service of the idea of we got to catch our guy. But we got to catch our guy can lead you to a lot of places.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned like all the different departments wanting to take credit for it, because certainly one of the last scenes I left off watching it today was like, oh well, this murder happened in this town and this murder happened to this town, so call this person for the shoe size and call this person for the prints, and it's just like everybody doesn't want to work together. They all want to claim this big capture for themselves, and it seems like if they had worked together, maybe they could have saved a few lives.
Right. And you see that with a lot of like I mean this is sort of blunt, but I think you see that with a lot of the California serial killers. I mean, we saw that just a year ago with Michelle McNamara and the documentary
Mm.
HBO series I'll Be Gone in the Dark about the Golden State Killer and her attempt to find out who he was, and ultimately she did with the help of a lot of, like citizen investigators and stuff. But it is sort of strange, I think, to look back on this time that doesn't really seem like it was that long ago. Like 40, 50, 60 years are not really that long in terms of the history of time, but there was a lot of violence that captured a lot of national attention in a way that I don't think we have anymore. And I don't know why that is.
I wanted
And
to mention
when was the last time you visited Zodiac, John? Let's include you here.
it's been a long time. I It's funny. It's for me. I really love Fincher. All I even some of his lesser films, as we'll talk about, I really really like a lot. Zodiac for me is just one that I have such a hard time wrapping my head around, and part of that might just be me and like I love what you mentioned, Roxanne, about like these movies being puzzle pieces. And to me, this one is like six pieces are missing. one of them is like a pizza, one of them is a hammer, and like I'm like, but it doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense. How could you not catch the guy?
Mm.
So it like at the time it was hard for me to wrap my head around it, and I just haven't gone back to it since. I think probably for that reason. It's also really, really scary.
It's horrifying.
Yeah.
The John Carroll Lynch stuff. There's like the scene where I think it's Jake Gyllenhaal goes like down into his basement and he's like a projectionist, I think, for a movie theater and also maybe a suspect in this thing. And that's like one of the
It's a
scariest.
different character, but yeah, he goes into the guy's basement
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
loses his shit. Yeah.
As I did watching it. So for me, it's like I totally admire the film. It's been too long to say like really what my opinion is on it, but it's always been kind of a curiosity for me, both in the sense of like trying to figure it out and trying to also figure out kind of why I don't love it the same way so many other people seem to. But, you know, clearly it's something that like he put his all into, and I can certainly admire that.
Yeah, I know. Like when we talked about our best of the decade, John film, like you can listen to us talk about Social Network more on episode 83. We I think we generally think that that's one of the top tier Fincher films, but you'll talk to some other people and they believe that Zodiac is his masterpiece. I think there's probably a good amount of people out there who think that.
Yeah.
Me. That's me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's you. All right.
That's probably a lot of people. I'd also say that like somebody asked me around the time Mank came out, you know, what's the best Fincher movie? And I was like, well, for me, like my favorite Fincher movie is The Social Network, but I don't think of that as much of a Fincher movie as something like Zodiac, which like isn't for me my favorite, but like it's the most Fincher, so it depends on what your speed is there.
Mm-hmm.
Coming to Fincher the way you described, Roxanne, I'm like not at all surprised to hear that Zodiac is your favorite. It just makes sense to me.
Yeah, and Social Network is my least favorite.
Yeah, I can see that too. It's so interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
For another podcast, I guess. But you know, a year after he made this like very, very, you know, I'll say it, like chilling serial killer movie, he came back with what some people would call a reverse Forrest Gump in the form of The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. So, Max, you watched this movie for the first time. I've been raving about it since 2008, but to you, since we've been doing this podcast, and I've waited long enough, and I need you to tell me what you thought of the thing.
Right, and it's funny because I ignored it for a long time. I thought it was just like petty Oscar bait, right? They certainly build it that way. You look at the art that they use to advertise this movie, and it's atrocious. It's like yeah, Brad Pitt and Kate Blanchett as like their like normal ages, like just staring at you from the box, and you're like, what is this movie even about? It says nothing about what goes on here. And I think to give you the summary of Benjamin Button, if you're unfamiliar with the film or it's been a while, I think it's adapted from a F. Scott Fitzgerald novella and certainly expanded upon into this big 2 hour and 40-minute epic. Benjamin Button, played by Brad Pitt, is born, and he has this illness where he is actually born as an old man, and he's tossed aside by his paternal parent, and he ends up at the home. I'd say this house for old folks, right? And his mother is played by
Taraji P.
yeah,
Henson.
Taraji P. Henson, and then you have the future Oscar winner Mahershala Ali is in the movie. That was a surprise to see. Obviously, the movie is stacked, cast top to bottom of great actors, and as it goes on, you find out that Benjamin Button isn't dying. Right, his initial thought was like he'd just keep aging and die within like 3 weeks or something, but it's actually the reverse is happening. And this whole story is told very much in Forrest Gump way, considering that Benjamin Button shares a screenwriter with the screenwriter of Forrest Gump. And you see this old woman at the hospital. She's on her dying day, and she's recounting her life. And the story of this man that she met throughout her life. And it is one of those, like, it's set up as like this magnificent story, right? Because it's things that you wouldn't believe. For me, that reads as like most part Forrest Gump, and then some parts like Big Fish-esque, like these like wild adventures that he would have, and just go places. I mean, maybe not as fantastical, but certainly throughout we see the whole span of Benjamin Button's life, and eventually, even though he met Kate Blanchett's character when they were kids, they stay together their entire lives, and keep on bumping into each other. And not only that, but he meets other people along the way. He has a short, brief relationship with a character played by Tilda Swinton. He lives his life, right? He meets his father later in life, and there's certain mishaps and stuff, and you learn just exactly how far the story goes with the Kate Blanchett character. I don't know, John. I think I enjoyed myself. It really moved. I tell you, if I was supposed to feel sad at the ending, though, I wasn't sad at all. And I think my reading from what was online is that some people are like, they're a big bubbling mess at the end of the film, and maybe that's why like they connect with it more. But I was like, no, that it ended, and yeah, I had a good time with it, but I wouldn't necessarily say it was my favorite. I think that I appreciate the time that I had with it, and I didn't regret watching it.
Okay, well, that's fair. Roxana, have you seen this film? Thought about it ever since you saw it for the first time?
That's a very good question. I have seen it, and I probably am like where Max is, in that like I liked it well enough.
Mhm.
But there was something about it that just felt a little bit more like a technical achievement to me than necessarily a narrative one. And I think it's because some of it, sometimes to me, it just feels more like a Coen Brothers movie than a Fincher movie. Like
Yeah, that's interesting.
there's something like tonally about it that it was difficult for me to connect to. But I do remember crying. I definitely think that I'm pretty sure that happened. And I don't know. I love Brad Pitt like fully. I don't think I've ever disliked a Brad Pitt performance. So I think that went really far for me as well, in terms of just helping to make it real for me. It's just interesting because, like you said, written by the same guy who did Forrest Gump, and like I think Curious Case of Benjamin Button is Fincher's biggest win at the Oscars, at least in terms of like nominations, because I
Yeah,
think it was
Yeah, it got like a
nominations.
nominated.
zillion nominations.
Yeah.
Yeah, it had like 13 or 14, and I think it won 3 again,
Yeah,
all for like
that was
technical stuff.
that was Slumdog Millionaire year.
Yeah, so that was
Oh,
Danny
right.
Boyle's year.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I like it well enough. It's just that to me feels sort of like the Fincher outlier.
It definitely does feel like the Fincher outlier. I think that there's more connecting it, at least, in my Fincher worldview, it just of like him like trying to desperately be like just more of, like other people around him, and not even just the sort of aging normally aspect to everybody else, but like he meets this kind of like crazy guy with a zillion stories, and he's like, oh, I'm going to chase after him for a while, and it's like, okay, now I'm going to go to the military, I'm going to be like this. And in that way it does feel a lot like Forrest Gump, but I feel like almost the presence of Eric Roth is like a fake out, and we're supposed to think it's very Forrest Gumpy, but like to me, I don't feel like this big blubbering mess at the end. Like, I'm a big blubbering mess the whole time. And for me, it's like him meeting all these people and having all these experiences, and also knowing that like I'm never going to see this person again because of the way I am, and that like just him having to deal with that his whole life and talking about that it like really really affects me. Every time that he leaves Kate Blanchett, you sort of think like that's it, and then they kind of get brought back together, and she's always has this reaction to seeing him for the first time because he's gotten progressively younger, and it's just like, heartbreaking, and but also like she's exhilarated some of the time, because that, like, look, we're the same age now, like we can actually do this thing that we've wanted to do forever. But also knowing that, like, every single day that progresses, it's closer to not being possible any longer. And when is that day going to come that actually, like, we need to say no? Is it going to be tomorrow? Is it going to be the next day? What is it? And that sort of, like, always kind of, I don't know, it just paints the film with, like, this, like, overwhelming sadness for me of, like, a life that could be one way, it could be another way, and it really can't be any of those ways. It has to be this one specific way. I'm going to try to make the best of it, but I also know that, like, there's nothing I can do about it.
It's very
And
melancholy.
yeah, right. And Pitt's performance in that sense is really interesting, because he's like very, very introverted, and, like, I don't know, he makes me feel all those things, even though in a lot of cases he's covered in a ton of makeup, or he's, like, digitally, like, turned into a computer graphic. But I think it all works. I mean, I think a lot of the you could give, his voice is just, he kind of nails, like, what that character should be, I think. But um yeah, I don't love, I would say, like, the framing device and it having to be set in Hurricane Katrina. Like, that's kind of weird. Um, but I do think that, like, I think that, and her, like, oh, this is your, the diary and the daughter. It's, like, a little bit strange, but the actual material,
Spoilers.
sorry. I mean, it's a 12-year-old movie. So yeah, I have a special place in my heart. It's another one that I have, like, a really hard time placing within the Fincher canon, but I really like the movie.
I,
And I
I,
think,
I I think
yeah,
for me, what's is like the thing that makes it unique is the special effect, the that
yeah,
center special effect. Without that, we've seen this movie before.
fair enough. Girl with the Dragon Tattoo came out in 2011. It was adaptation of, I believe his name is Stieg Larsson, the
Yes,
Millennium
I've
trilogy.
read the book, so I can remember a lot of this. So
Roxanne, have you read the book or books?
Yeah, I've read the books and I've also seen the European
Okay.
adaptations too.
So why don't you kick this one off a little bit and tell us sort of about the film, what you think of it, and why it's a, I guess, good or possibly bad representation of Fincher.
Okay. I think it's good. I liked it very
Yeah.
much.
Okay.
I remain sort of sad that we never got the sequels, but at the same time, I think Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is the best book. So, you win
Mhm.
some, you lose some. Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is sort of telling two stories at once. In typical Fincher fashion, there are two mysteries going on here. The first is a sort of, well, not sort of, it is a family mystery, in that there is a very famous and powerful family in Stockholm who hires this disgraced financial journalist, Mikael Blomkvist, who in the film is played by Daniel Craig, to look into what happened to one of their young, I don't want to say heiresses, but basically like one of the young members of their family who disappeared. And so this character, played by Christopher Plummer, hires Mikhail Blomkvist to do this, and that choice sort of leads him into this very horrifying uh series of revelations about this family's legacy and all the awful shit that they used to get up to in terms of having like connections to neo-Nazis and just being very conservative and sort of evilly industrial. And so in doing this investigation into what could have happened to this family member who disappeared, Mikhail ends up crossing paths with this brilliant hacker and researcher, Lisbeth Salander, who is played by Rooney Mara, and they essentially team up to figure out what happened um, so many years ago to the Vanger family, and that's like, I would say, the first 70% of the movie. And then the other 30% is more of a financial sort of mystery about financial corruption and this idea, which we sort of saw recently with GameStop, which is that your economy is not the stock market. And there's a lot of fake, sort of not real money that gets funneled through the economy in the form of the stock market. And basically, it's just a lot of rich people patting each other's pockets. So the movie is sort of doing two things at once. And I like them both very much. I think, again, this is Fincher literally and figuratively at his most cold.
Mhm.
I think that it is his movie that probably honestly, alongside Seven for me, makes the most compelling argument that people are fundamentally bad, and that human nature is intrinsically greedy and vicious and cruel, and that it takes like all of your willpower to not be that way if you're choosing to not be that way. And I think it's saying something about like the ease with which people can become evil. And just in terms of brutality, I do think it's Fincher's most brutal film, but I think that he has a flair for those moments of ultra violence, right? I mean, you have
Yeah.
Jared Leto getting his face destroyed in Fight Club,
Mhm.
and you have a couple of pretty brutal rape and murder scenes here, and then you obviously have the horrible murders in Zodiac. And then, I mean, if we were going to talk about Gone Girl, then you can't talk
Yeah.
about that
MPH.
Rosamund Pike. Yeah, you can't talk about that bed scene. So I think that Fincher has always had a flair for like how violence, I don't want to say can almost be erotic, but how it has a sort of thrill to that danger that is very difficult to replicate in other circumstances. And I think that he does that very well with Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. I watched this movie for you know, it's sort of like Zodiac where I saw it. I was like, okay, I guess that's good. I had read the first book. I wasn't like a huge fan of it. I had seen the Swedish version of the film. Wasn't a huge fan of that either. You saw this on opening day. It was Christmas Day, 2011, which is just interesting choice.
No, they were saying it was the feel bad Christmas
Yeah, yeah,
movie.
yeah.
I remember that, yeah.
And it has the really wild opening credits sequence with I can't remember what song is it now.
It's Immigrant Song, but it's Karen O and Trent
Yes,
Reznor's cover of
right,
it.
right,
But
right.
but it's a really cool like special effects thing. I think like it
Yeah.
won awards
Yeah, it
like the
was
Libby
wild.
Medal. Yeah.
It's
Because it
kind of
almost looks like black oil,
yeah, it
like
does, right?
forming and
Yeah.
reforming, yeah.
Very strange. But yeah, I thought I was like, okay, well, I guess that's like a David Fincher movie that I kind of enjoyed, and I watched it again recently for this, and I liked it a lot more than I remembered. And you know, one of the things that like I had a hard time with, I think all three versions of this the first time around is just how dense like all the plotting is. Because like you said, like there's a lot of stuff about the financial situation and the journalism and the libel and everything, you know, that Rooney Mara's character, like her, you know, it takes a while for them to meet up and start digging into this case, right? And then
Right,
when
and
they
she's
finally,
the exciting part for me, and it's like the book takes too long, and like somehow the story feels like it takes too long to get to her.
when they finally get together, I'm like, you're like, okay, like here we go, like we're gonna solve some crimes now, and like at that point, it's just like a bunch of montages, which I thought was really, I thought was really weird, but I really kind of enjoyed it this time. And he's just sort of like, screw you, I know what you want, I'm not giving it to you. Uh, we have to get from this point where they finally meet and are going to solve this case to the end, and we're going to do it as quickly as we can. And I was like, yeah, okay, that's cool, that's fine. So yeah, that was kind of funny. The I mean, she's really really good. It's such like a, you know, it's this world like you said that's like full of really like just awful people. Even the ones that are kind of nice are awful. And you drop this woman into it who's just like she's just like is a bomb. She just like explodes. The whole thing collapses in on itself as soon as she shows up. It's kind of wild. And then at the end, again, I'm going to spoil another movie. You have
Okay.
this like great moment of like, it's the first moment of like real, like honest to goodness, like heartwarming humanity where she like fixes up his jacket for him. And then she like sees him with Robin Wright and just tosses in the dumpster and rides off. And I was like, that was freaking cool.
Yeah, she's great.
Yeah, I was like, man, wow, okay. Like I
Yeah,
feel all kinds of things now. I'm like sad
yeah.
and
And I think
pissed off.
it does a really good job. Well, okay, I'm gonna get like vaguely political, so you can feel free to
Oh
pivot.
no, please,
But
that's fine.
I think it does a good job making the argument that like a certain level of wealth is inherently in and of itself corrupt.
Yeah.
Because like they don't really stress it as much in the film, but in the book there's like this whole subplot about how Christopher Plummer's character basically like tricked Mikhail Blomkvist into like taking this like investigation case, and then at the end
Mhm.
doesn't give him the evidence that he had promised, so
Yeah,
that
they talk about that in the film a bit.
yeah, they like talk about it a bit, and then that sort of is like another thing that ties Rooney Mara's character and Daniel Craig's character together, is that they team up essentially unknowingly to bring down this like big financial scion. But I think there is like a subtle argument being made throughout the books that like you can't trust anybody in any sort of position of power. Like cops are useless, like the government is useless, like people that run these gigantic corporations are inherently in it only for themselves. So like the only hope you have is like these individual solitary lone wolf figures. And I think like personally for me, because Daniel Craig is so hot, it's really hard for me because like in the books he is a little bit more like he is also like handsome or whatever, but he's like a bit more of a rogue in terms of like his persona. And I think that the movie softens that a little bit so that Elizabeth Salander stands out more.
Yeah, okay.
Um
He's a
but
cat friend.
yeah. But I mean, like, this movie has like a lot of also very scary moments, like moments that definitely gave me nightmares.
Oh
So
my god.
Well,
Yeah.
before we move on from Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, I want to say that like the role of Lisbeth Salander has become like one of those like iconic like actress must-have roles, right? It just seems like I don't want to. I guess I will compare it to like the Joker, right? Like it seems like every man has to like want to play the Joker and get success, but certainly it feels like there's a hot commodity to be Lisbeth whenever you can.
I
I
think
wonder
up
if
until the Claire Foy version.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, curious as somebody who's like consumed most or all of this material. Like, is it like sort of a dead IP now, or is there a chance that like somebody else is going to get a crack at it?
I don't know. I mean, I think that I think at this point it's pretty much dead because the Claire Foy version that they did was, if I'm recalling correctly, like a half finished book that
Mm,
Larson left behind, and then somebody else finished it. So I think that like at this point, like there's just not really the authentic feel for what he did with this character.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
I think they're still writing books. I think they
yeah,
hired somebody else, and
Yeah.
yeah, like I think they're hoping it'll be one of those like long running mysteries, but at a
Yeah.
certain point, like they built her up as a character so much that I don't know where else she can go.
Yeah, that's interesting. It does feel like, and even watching this film, which I really liked this time around, it does make you wonder, like, would this have been better as a 8 episode miniseries on, some streaming service that would let them really expand upon some of these people some more? But I don't know. It's a fun and it's a very, very weird little movie. Speaking of which, Gone Girl, I watched recently. It's the most recent Fincher film before Mank came out late last year. And for me, this is like I said Social Network is my favorite. I think this is right up there with it. And I've loved it since the first time I saw it. I should say that I read the book before I saw the movie. I read the book Gone Girl on my honeymoon. Um,
That's a great time for that.
yeah, well, it was right around the time the movie was coming out, and I really wanted to read it, and I was worried that I was going to get spoiled before I got a chance to see it because the movie came out while I was on my honeymoon, and I thought, well, I guess I should read it now. I don't have any other time left, and so I did that. It was an interesting experience, but it was okay, and I came back to the movie. It was great. Um, but yeah, I think that this is like I said earlier, just the classic sort of like I'm afraid of who I really am characters. Amy to a lesser extent, she kind of leans into it, but she requires this like very, very specific sort of, I guess, set of characteristics around her for that to work, and she doesn't have them, so she then kind of acts out. Ben Affleck is absolutely terrified of who he is, cannot accept whatsoever that he's just a huge piece of shit. Like he needs to please everybody. He's incapable of pleasing anybody. And the movie's just cult like.
Was that tough for Ben Affleck? It doesn't seem.
I don't know. You'll have to ask him. But yeah, the film is built around this couple. He is about to ask her for a divorce, but before he gets a chance, on their 5th anniversary, she disappears. The police get involved. It looks like she was kidnapped. But there are certain clues left behind on this scavenger hunt that she set up for him that suggests maybe something else happened. And eventually he has to try to figure out where she is and get her to come home before he gets arrested, charged with her murder. There's so many great things about Gone Girl. I mean, I love the cast. I think that both Ben Affleck and Rosamund Pike are really, really perfect for those particular parts. But the supporting cast is really great and very eclectic also. You have Tyler Perry as the defense attorney, who I think is really good. Neil Patrick Harris is like one of her former lovers who it becomes sort of a suspect in the story.
Patrick Fugit.
Yeah, is one of the cops, who's sort of like in charge of the investigation, along with Kim Dickey. And even Minkus from Boy Meets World is another one of the cops in Missouri town investigating the crime, which is kind of funny.
Who was also in Zodiac, right?
Oh, was he?
Yeah, I think he plays he plays the victim that survives.
That's interesting. I don't remember that. It's been too long. Yeah, it's just a really very, very weird movie. There's Missy Pyle, oh my gosh, as like the what's her name, Nancy Grace sort of character. She is wild. It's just dissecting like these like really, really askew aspects of classic America, as you would, from so many different angles. And I think they all the arrows hit the bullseye, in my opinion, for this movie. There's a really, really great monologue, I think, that gets a lot of love for good reason about halfway through the film from Rosamund Pike's character, talking about basically why she did this, why she does what she does.
Yeah. And John, if you want to talk about like framing devices, the framing device for Gone Girl is through like a journal, right? That's where you hear a lot of what's going on with Amy in this movie. And I wanted to ask you, John, so your wife never had a children's series written after her?
Not to my knowledge, no. Basically, Amy. I don't know. I can't think of what like Cool Caitlin. I'm not sure. No such series exists. Yeah, that's something. And her parents are a real piece of work. But just back to what you said about the framing device, like what's really cool about this film is that it sets that up and then like absolutely like obliterates it halfway through, and it's a different movie from that point on. And the same thing happens in the book, which interestingly was written by Gillian Flynn, and then she wrote the screenplay for this, which I think really works well. Works in its service. Roxana, some Gone Girl thoughts?
I really like Gone Girl basically for all the reasons you listed. I think that having Gillian Flynn adapt her own text was like really the only way you could go, just
Yeah.
because this book was everywhere, like literally everywhere when it came out. And I think that she did an excellent job like adapting the very sharp tone that is so excellently used throughout the book. I mean, I think of this movie as being very prickly in terms of everything that it's saying about like the failures of heterosexual relationships and the failures of gender roles and honestly the failures of millennials because I think it's telling a very specific sort of like post recession
Mm-hmm.
slice of American experience. So I think in that way, Fincher really builds that world. I think about their like crappy McMansion that they move
Mm-hmm.
into after being in New York, and I think about the crummy bar that Affleck is running with his sister, who's played by Carrie Coon,
Mm-hmm.
and then I
Called
think
the
of like
bar.
called the bar, and then I think, of the very like cold, sterile marble and glass house that Neil Patrick Harris is living in. I mean, I
Uh-huh.
don't think Rosamund Pike has ever been better. I don't think she's ever been like challenged as much,
Yeah.
really. And I just think that they did an excellent job with the cool girl monologue, which like has so fully stood the test of time.
Yeah.
And like they really needed to nail that to like understand the vibe of the movie. And then like once that hit, it was like, okay, this is yeah, you got it. You're good, you know?
Yeah, it was I remember watching it for the first time and having just finished the book, thinking that, like, that was gonna be a magic trick to make that switch happen, and I was a little bit nervous for it, to be honest with you, but, like, the last 5 minutes leading up to it, and obviously the monologue that comes right after it, are so perfectly done. It's really, like, the highlight of the movie where it's, like, firing on all cylinders. I do think that, like, both the book and the movie kinda end with a little bit of a whimper, but it's more just because everything else that comes before it is so strong, and there's, like, not, like, a great way to wrap it up, like, it has to shift again, and there's not enough time left to, like, really dive into sort of the implications of that shift, but I think it still works pretty well. Like, everything that's implied is interesting enough that I think you can leave it kinda satisfied. Max, before we go, any last Gone Girl thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think it's like also like a interesting role for Ben Affleck. Certainly, as his public persona has shown, like maybe he's a flawed individual, but he always selected roles that sort of made him like the hero, right? And when he comes here, it's he has to play a role that like really needs to convince you that it's a possibility that he killed his wife, and it's just like he has to get there.
Yeah,
Where I mean, like today, you look at him, you're like, yeah, I mean, he could probably do that, but
I
my
think
one
it's
of
a
my
really good pairing if you watched it with the game.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah, that's interesting. That's a movie we didn't talk about. That's his post Seven sort of. I guess that's like a very much of a puzzle movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
Quite literally with Michael Douglas.
Yep.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, are there other we talked about a handful of Fincher movies, but before we jump out of this, any other like Fincher movies that we didn't mention that you want to like give a quick shout out to, Roxana?
I mean, I don't want to say well, I will say it, whatever. I mean, I mostly love them all. Like I still really love Seven. I think although I think it became an immediate joke, I still think it's incredibly effective, and I think the last 10 minutes are still stressful no matter how many times
I,
you've
I
watched them.
I remember the first time I watched Seven, I was like horrified. It literally
Yeah.
like was on my mind for 3 days after I saw it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Seven is like closest to Fincher's actual worldview, I
I
think.
think so too.
Yeah. And then, like I love Fight Club. I think that it's exalted for some of the wrong reasons, but again, I still think it's a very strong analysis of like late stage capitalism's failures. And I think that again, you could probably pair The Game and Gone Girl together, and then it would be really interesting to pair Fight Club and Benjamin Button together just to see what Brad Pitt is doing so differently in those two movies. And I think that would be worthwhile.
That'd be really interesting.
Well, there you go. You have your Roxana double
A double
feature.
Please send me all of your Brad Pitt screenshots. Thank you.
Final thoughts, Max?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think that I really loved Fincher like as much as like maybe other people do, but you look at his work and you say that it's movie after movie, it's solid or better, and you're like, how many directors have that kind of output that they can say that they claim to? I think that the movies do get better on repeated viewings, or maybe like if you haven't seen them in a while, revisit them and you'll remember like how good they are. I've been wanting to see Gone Girl for the longest time. I don't think Shannon's ever seen it, so like I've always wanted to watch that with her because I think she'd think it's wild. But certainly, I think that it's I hate to use this word because it was used in one of my film studies classes, but it's a rich filmography.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'll just close. One of you, I can't remember who, earlier on described him as meticulous, or at least his reputation is that of somebody who's meticulous. And one of my favorite Fincher stories is on the set of Gone Girl. They're filming this scene where Ben Affleck is going to fly to New York to meet with the attorney for the first time, and he's trying to be a little bit inconspicuous because of his, his face is all out there in the media right now. And so he's told to wear this baseball cap, and Fincher gives him a Yankees cap to wear because I guess he's going to New York. And Affleck absolutely says, "I will not wear a Yankees cap." And he says, "I'll wear my Red Sox cap instead." And Fincher says, "You will not wear a Red Sox cap." There's no reason for that character to have a Red Sox cap. They didn't film anything for 2 days. And then they finally settled on a New York Mets cap instead.
Love it.
Which is pretty wild. So he's both meticulous and can compromise, which I guess is all you can ask for. I hope you enjoyed our David Fincher conversation.
John, can you tell them where the other movies are talked about, these other 3 episodes?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. We did talk about some other Fincher movies on previous episodes of the podcast. You can listen to Fight Club on episode number 80, Social Network on episode 83, which I think you said was our best of the decade list, right?
Yep. And
then we did Mank along with Citizen Kane back in episode 103, so not terribly long ago, if you're interested in those. And before we jump to what we've been watching, let's talk a little bit about where you can follow us. I'm on Twitter at John L. Gilpatrick. Max, you're at
MH Colville.
Roxana, where are you at?
Mine is just my full name, so Roxana, and then there's an underscore, and then Haddadi, Hadadi.
Awesome. And the podcast is at It's the Pick Pod. You can also like us on Facebook at It's the Pictures. And you can send us an email at itsthepictures@gmail.com with your thoughts on David Fincher, on the Golden Globes, I guess. You can tell us what your favorite Super Bowl commercial was, or what you thought of the Weeknd's halftime performance. Anybody have any super hot 15-second takes, Roxana?
I thought it was really good. I enjoyed the Weeknd. I thought the camera work and production design were great, and Tom Brady sucks. Fuck him forever. And yeah.
We already have an instant enter in the GIF Hall of Fame.
It's just trash. I hate him so much.
No, I'm talking about the Weeknd.
Oh yeah, I mean that's an amazing and I feel like, it was interesting because I saw a lot of muted reactions, like a lot of people saying like, oh, like there weren't any standout moments or whatever. But I can't think of like another recent Super Bowl that has had an instant GIF like that. Like that is going to live on the internet for a long time.
Left Shark is
Left Shark was the only other one I can remember.
Yeah.
But even that like doesn't pop up as much as I think this is going to. Like that was like, you saw that and you're like, oh my God, this is going to live on the internet forever. So that's something. That was cool. I enjoyed it too. Max, you're our resident New Englander. What's the deal? Are you happy or sad?
I'm upset.
Oh.
I did not want him to win number 7 for another team.
He did. I'm sorry. Cool. So yeah, send us that digression. Send us your emails. Tell us about the episode. Tell us about what a great guest Roxana has been.
Oh, thank
Um, yes, you can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or any other podcatching app. While you're there, please leave us a review. 5 stars will help other people discover and enjoy the show. Roxana, you mentioned your Twitter account. Is there anywhere else that people can follow you after they finish listening to this episode?
That's basically it. I am absolutely awful at updating my website, and I don't think I've done it in like 4 years. But you can check out my Rotten Tomatoes page. I am a top critic there, which is now pretty cool. And
Awesome.
yeah, that's usually where I post a lot of my reviews and stuff.
Cool. What we've been watching lately, I'm going to go first really quick because we're running a little bit over. I have so little to say about The Little Things, which is the new, I guess, serial killer movie that premiered on HBO Max a couple weeks ago. I thought, oh my gosh, like, look, a serial killer movie starring Denzel Washington. Like, thank you for making a movie for me. And it was such a bummer. It was so boring and unappealing in every single way that I don't want to waste anybody else's time with more thoughts on The Little Things other than to say, like, don't watch it. It's really not good at all. Earlier on, you guys mentioned that Jared Leto like had a Golden Globe nomination, and I assumed it was for something else that I didn't even know, but it's for this movie, and my
Yes,
mind is blown. I can't even believe that. I think
and
I
a
even said
SAG
like, well, at
award.
least it's not for this movie, but it
And a
is.
SAG award. And a SAG
Oh
award
my
nomination.
god.
Like, can you imagine, like, what actor is like, you know what, this is good acting? How dare you?
Oh my gosh. It's that it's so dispiriting. So yeah, so The Little Things is really bad. Roxana, tell us about Minari.
Yeah, I love Minari very much. You probably have seen, tons of stuff about it since it started playing film festivals last year. But now you can finally watch it, after like months and months of
A
people
year,
praising
yeah.
it. Yeah. It is really exceptional. I think that it probably has the best ensemble outside of One Night in Miami. From a film last year, Stephen Yoon is amazing. It would be great if he got an Oscar nom. And my understanding is that A24 is releasing it in theaters and also virtual theaters this week. And then it hits like video on demand and rental in 2 weeks. So I would say if you really want like a very beautifully, poignantly American story about like the failures and fulfillment of the American dream, get on that. And it's not all depressing. I mean, I know sometimes you can like, I do this where I'm like, oh no, this movie is beautiful, but really I just mean it's like sad, like that it's sad. But I do think it's also very, very funny and has a lot of
Yeah, it
moments of
is.
yeah, has a lot of moments of just like weird, sort of like cross-cultural and cross-generational disconnect that fit very
Yeah,
well.
the wrestling was great.
Yes, very much so.
I thought one of the things I really just loved about it is like both how specific it is and how universal it feels.
Mhm.
And I think it's something that like I hope people give a chance because I think they'll find it really rewarding. And yeah, I too hope that like Stephen Yoon can find an Oscar nomination out of this. Certainly, like now is the year to
Right.
dig into these little movies that that might not otherwise get the attention. They get drowned out in all the
Mhm.
ridiculous politicking of it all, and this is just something that's so pure, and would love to see it recognized that way. Max, I think you've seen it, right?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah, yeah.
And hopefully by the time I get this up, they still have some windows available because they've been selling out pretty quickly
Well,
for
that's a good thing.
for
Yeah.
those virtual windows. But like Roxana said, it will be available hopefully soon if you don't catch it during these limited windows.
Cool. Then Max, tell us a little bit about Judas and the Black Messiah.
Yes, I'm going to, but I want to plug the Substack and
Oh yeah,
the newsletter has been going on. I've done the Sundance coverage is there as well as the previous episodes, so you'll want to check that out. It's the pictures Substack. I've been keeping up with that there.
I've
We
been
had
doing this how people can follow us spiel for like 98 episodes, and then you drop a Substack on me, and
I
I
know.
need to incorporate it into my routine. I'm sorry. I always forget. I will remember next time.
All right. Well, the newest newsletter had reviews of To the Wonder, and I think it's not To the Wonder; it's The World to Come.
I was going to
And
say, To the Wonder, was that
yeah.
an Affleck?
No Malik. The World to Come and Supernova are there. But now I saved Judas and the Black Messiah for the podcast, and yes, this was the movie that is coming out to HBO Max this weekend. It was billed as like this late Oscar comer or whatever, and it's about Fred Hampton and the Black Panthers. Also in the late 60s, I believe. It's that 1969 time period is very ripe for stories.
Yeah.
And it stars Daniel Kaluuya and Lakeith Stanfield, and the idea here is Daniel Kaluuya is playing Fred Hampton, the leader of the Black Panthers at that time, and you can he's also in Trial of the Chicago 7, if that name sounds familiar and you've seen that movie. So yes, that character has seen a lot of traction this year. But it's basically about the movement from the Black Panthers and how the police are kind of crooked. They want to take them down, and they hire this guy played by Lakeith Stanfield, who is sort of integrating himself into the Black Panthers and becoming the right-hand man of Fred Hampton to dire circumstances. And I don't know, I enjoyed it. I saw it during its limited window at Sundance. It played for a night there for a big festival premiere before its debut on HBO Max. And yeah, I think the strongest reason to watch is Daniel Kaluuya's role as Fred Hampton. I think he's wonderful. Maybe they waited too long to release the movie because there's already a lot of traction for other roles, but hopefully he sneaks in for an Oscar nomination as well. Roxana, have you had a chance to see this one yet?
I have not yet, so that is
Okay.
on my list.
All right,
I'm looking forward to this one also.
Yep, just a few more days.
Yeah, great. Bet she'll wash the taste of the little things out of my mouth on HBO Max. So that's good. And I think that's going to do it. Roxana, thank you so much for coming on. We had a really, really great time with you talking about David Fincher and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I had a great time. Thanks, guys.
Cool. And we thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Bye.
Bye.